Welcome back. And this day we usually celebrate the International Museum Day, and it is marked on May 18th of every year, and it's coordinated by the International Council of Museums. The event highlights a specific theme that changes every year according to a relevant story or an issue that is facing museums internationally. The IMD, or the International Museum Day, provides opportunity for museum professionals to meet the public and raise awareness about the challenges that are facing museums, and also to spotify or shed the light over or the spot over the importance or of the role that the museum plays to exhibit history and also the relics. And it's also promoting a dialogue between museum professionals. We're very delighted to be having with us live over the phone Mr. Elhamy Zayat, our tourism expert. Good morning, Mr. Zayat.
Good morning.
How are you doing, sir?
Fine, thank you.
First of all, tell us who started it, whose idea was to raise an International Museum Day for the whole world to celebrate?
What I remember is that it was done in 1977.
Yes.
And this is when they started celebrating the Day of Museums. And I don't recall exactly who started it, but
Okay.
I know I can tell you some more about museum, because this is the whole purpose, is to tell the people what's important about museum. You
Right.
spoke about the past, but we also can speak about the future. There are museums that are futuristic. We go somewhere like in the United States, we have some museums that specialize in the space invention, what is going to be done, what is going to happen. There are some museums for everything, for armies, like in France, for instance, we have one museum specialized for the armies. It shows what they were wearing, what munitions, what are the cannons they were using. So they have a variety of purpose. What we have to retain is that there are several types also of museum, several categories. One which is owned by the state, by the country itself. One which is financed by donations. And some others are private collections that are exhibited by private people. So we have, for instance, here Mahmoud Khalil, the Museum of Modern Art, which is next to the former President Zayat's house. And this is beautiful because it has paintings from modern paintings like Van Gogh and Rembrandt. And you can see art. You have museum for history, and these are the most common we hear about everywhere. And we will have actually the new museum, the Gem Museum, the Grand Museum, which will be next to the pyramids, as you know. And so we have a variety of topics. And this is the interesting thing about museums. It can interest everybody. From young kids, we have museums for comics. You know, the comics that were written since 1909. Tintin, if you remember the name, Tintin, it was very famous. And there are museums for it which shows exactly all the books that were written about Tintin, its comics. So we have a variety of museums, and it explains to the people what is happening, what has happened, and what could happen, or what we think will happen in the future.
Right. As we are speaking of museums, museums are not only a place, like you earlier kindly said, it's not a place to talk about history, but it's also exhibiting places, documenting stories, talking about science. Like talking, of course, in a country like Egypt, it's possessing 1/3 of the world monuments. It's very normal to exhibit these statues. It's normal to talk about history, talk about the dynasties in the ancient Egyptian pharaohs and other cultures also. But in Western European cultures like the United States or in Paris or in England, in New York, for example, we have the Guggenheim Museum, we have the Museum of Natural History, we have the Museum of Modern Art, and we have other museums that they created them not on the basics of history, but also on another basis that talks about science, that talks about fiction, that talks about different themes. So
Yes.
talk to us about the different themes for museums.
You have, for instance, the Museum of Natural Science in London.
Right.
It's a museum which shows all the animals, the prehistorical animals like the
Dinosaurs.
the dinosaurs, etc. And it has the
Rhinoceros.
biggest one, yes, and the mammoth, which was the elephant that existed a long time ago. And it's a learning process for the young kids. It's a learning process for even people of my age. We always learn when we go to museum. And we remember, because when you see something in front of you, it's different from reading about it. When you see it, it sticks in your brain, and you can always remember it and tell stories about it to your children and to the family. So museums are we have the stamp museum, for the stamps from all over the world. There are exhibitions about the same topics. And I like to say, in France, they have the exhibition of the stamps, and they say the largest museum, the largest exhibition for the smallest item, because the stamp is very small. And it's a very large opportunity to see the exhibition. You can see stamps from all around the world. But also there is a stamp museum, which shows you in terms all the time the story of stamps all around the world, how it evolved and what it is in different countries.
Right. Of course, every museum, it's normal or traditional that every museum reflects the culture of its country. I mean, if a country possesses a lot of history, then most of the museums are related to history or talking about historical stories or exhibiting history and stuff like that. Countries that do not possess that much of history, they tend to create some other themes. Do you think the same thing is going on with the new millennium? I mean, with the advent of time and an advent of digital, age and everything. Do you think it's supposed to be going that way?
Absolutely. There is a museum that shows the development, for instance, of computers. How they developed since the time, how the computer was developed. It was developed by an Englishman who was trying to break the codes of the Germans during the Second World War. And by creating this, he created a machine to be able to decipher the codes they were sending from one ship to the other or from the headquarters to the other. And this is one of the how they defeated the Germans in the Second World War. So museum, and it shows the story of computers. We know very little, but this museum shows you exactly how it developed. And in the States, they talk also about how it will develop in the future. The speed the data will be traveling at right now, and this helps discovering new things. Like you have for telephone, mobiles, you have the 4G, now you have the 5G, and now it's the 6G is coming. We don't have it in Egypt yet, but and many countries don't want to have the 5G because of they think it's a way for Chinese to spy on other countries. But anyhow, you have it. So It's up to people to use it or not to use it. But
Right.
people can read about it, yes.
Right. Mr. Elhamy Zayat, we'd like to thank you so much for talking to The Breakfast Show. You have a beautiful day. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of The Breakfast Show for this Friday. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you again tomorrow morning with a new episode of The Breakfast Show. So you have a good day.